Welcome to the Journey to Paid Speaking Gigs podcast. I'm your host, Charles Clark, and today I have Dan Pontefract on the call with us today. Dan, welcome to the show.
Charles, thank you so much for having me. Let's get with it.
Yeah, so, before we get started, let the Thrive Tribe know, who is Dan?
Well, first and foremost, Dan is a father of three, a husband of one, a Canadian who's written 4 books, has done 4 TEDs, and is really kind of here with a purpose statement as follows. We're not here to see through each other, Charles. We're here to see each other through each and every day. And so that kind of purpose statement for me is kind of why I believe I've been put on the planet, is to help people reach their full potential.
What does that statement mean to you?
Well, it's kind of my North Star, right? So when I
Mhm.
wake up and I'm thinking about the 3 teenagers or Denise, my better half, or I'm thinking about, working with clients, or when I used to be an executive, when I'm an author, when I'm going for a bike ride, I'm thinking about life. I just want to, help people, I suppose, in that notion of, well, where are they today and how might they get to wherever they want to go? And I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but
Yeah.
I believe that I bring some skills and tools to the game to help people get to that point.
Yeah. I think, for me to arrive to a powerful, profound statement like that of purpose, I feel like you have to go through something. I feel like there's a story behind that. What allowed you to arrive to that moment?
Oh, I think we're all, as the First Nations often say in some of their writings, we're all on a journey and a path to the waterfall, which is the metaphor of life, isn't it? And
Yeah.
so, I turned 50 this year, Charles, and I know I look boyishly 35, obviously,
Yeah.
but my past 50 years, I've been, I guess, brave enough, courageous enough, but also humble enough to look back and say, each and every day you get to learn something. Someone puts you in your place. Someone teaches you something. If you're open and honest with yourself to be that type of learned person, I think you'll have a much better life. Like for
Mhm.
me, things like alcoholic mother, growing up as a teenager, not the
Mhm.
greatest time, but you learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
I was on a national soccer team in Canada, blew out a knee.
Mhm.
Uh, didn't play soccer after that in competitive sort of notion for Canada or for provincial teams, etc.
Yeah.
So you can have little moments like that are negative, but you can have positive things like sitting in uh, sitting in a green room, and in that green room is sort of one of your idols, a guy by the name of Charles Handy in the UK, who wrote so many books about authenticity and purpose. And I went on before him in a speaking engagement, and he came there to see me.
Mhm.
And you're like, oh, that's just wild, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, 50 years of looking back and saying, if you're just open enough and humble enough to take the good with the bad and make that as a defining kind of purpose statement to you,
Mhm.
I think that's a better way to live life. To be honest, Charles.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like in life there's a few perspectives that we can have. And it's all by choice of what we choose to look at. So yeah,
Precise.
I agree with you 100%. Take me on that journey of how did you become a speaker and when did you realize that this is something that you're truly called to do?
Well, I would argue my dad growing up used to say, you should be on stage, son, because I guess I had a knack for the tongue around the house as a young kid. So in fact, I was privileged to be captain of soccer teams and basketball teams and volleyball teams. I was president of student council a couple times in high school. I went to university in McGill in Montreal, Canada, and same thing. Was afforded these leadership opportunities. So I've never been uncomfortable in front of people. That might be a bad thing if you're my wife, but it's a good thing if you're Dan. And so I ended up in the education field. So I was literally teaching high school students, and then I moved in to college and university circuit where I was kind of in charge of adult career changers.
Mhm.
And so right around 2000, 2001, 2002, I was thinking to myself, well, maybe I should go into the corporate world. And so I ended up joining a high tech company, and then I started delivering, sessions to executives. inside of that company. And then when I switched to a big telecom in Canada called TELUS right around 2008, I then said, you know what? I think it's time for me to actually be unleashed to the world.
Mm.
And I know that sounds pretentious and very un-Canadian, Charles, but I literally said, okay, I'm going to try and figure out if I can be a little more public now, not just, speaking in front of audiences in a company,
Yeah.
but externally. And lo and behold, it just sort of began to build. By 2009, 2010, I had done a first TED Talk, and then, kind of built from there.
Mm. Mm. Uh, what was the most, I guess, frightening thing for you to do? I mean, because that's a big act of boldness, right? To change careers almost to something where you have a platform and you're influencing other people. Was there any fears that you had to get over?
Yeah, I mean, we all have fears, and I think that's the thing. If you're humble enough to admit to some of those, like me, for example, heights, can't stand heights, so there's one. But I think the fear ultimately of putting yourself out there and getting tomatoes thrown at you, or you're not funny, or you're not impactful,
Yeah.
or your imposter syndrome is a huge one for me still to this day. I continuously try to hone the craft of writing and speaking and helping others. But don't forget, every day it's a craft.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the point is that as much as I've been in front of audiences prior to 2010, at executives, students, kids, what have you, the art, if you will, of publicly speaking in front of larger audiences, etc. That is much different than a speech to team members,
Hmm.
or like a motivational coach speech in a locker room.
Hmm.
You really got to sort of segregate the two kind of components there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. So in the middle of a pandemic, why do you feel now should speakers be truly using their voice more authentically?
Well, there's a number of reasons. I think first and foremost, regardless of the pandemic, if you have something to say of value, get it out there
Yeah.
in written format, and obviously in audio or kind of speaker format. I think that's really important. But now more than ever, I mean, what the pandemic has shown is a few things. One is we yearn for community, Charles. We yearn for people. We yearn
Mm.
for contact, and we learn from others. So to hide behind the fact that, oh, I can't have, a physical face-to-face audience, I'm not going to hear them cry or laugh or gasp at a story.
Mm.
I think it's just kind of antithetical to what speakers, ought to be considering of themselves and their talent.
Mm.
People need you. People
Yeah.
need to hear your story, your voice, your experience. So get on with it. And
Yeah.
what the pandemic, I think, has also shown is that those thinkers, speakers, writers, the ones that are getting up and still doing it like this in front of a webcam, if you will,
Yeah.
um, they still have a compelling, ultimately useful and fruitful uh, ideology or opportunity in front of them.
Mm.
And if they sort of are scared by the fact that there's no one behind that lens, and again, there's no
Mm.
audience, that's just a wrong approach. I'm a glass full guy, half full,
Yeah.
Charles, and so I'm looking at and have looked at the past year. Funny enough, happy pandemic anniversary to you, by the way, as we record this today, right?
Yeah.
Woo! Officially a pandemic for a year now. Fantastic.
Yeah.
But I think some of us have pivoted well, and others haven't. Some have been
Yeah.
stuck with deer in the headlights, and I think that's telling.
Yeah. I think I realized in something completely new, this is something that we've never experienced in our lifetime. No one has. That the story that we have to share is still compelling. It still reaches the hearts of people, even though you can't see their expressions per se, right? And I
It's just
think,
it.
yeah, yeah, I think that's
I
the,
mean,
yeah. Go
you
ahead.
can see it in the chat sometimes, and then if you have like open Q&A, I mean,
Right.
I think I've done probably 60 odd keynotes and discussions for the
Mm.
past year.
Yeah.
It must. I didn't really count, but it's definitely up there. And you still have that opportunity within the keynote or the chat or whatever, the discussion itself, to reach someone. And
Mm.
again, it's a pretty good opportunity to hone your craft in how well you tell the story or
Yeah.
stories.
And
Because no
rehearsing,
matter what,
right?
yeah, stories can be told, and you can get to the heart and mind of and soul of people by how well you're telling that story.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, I mean, it shows the way you practice, because you can't see those expressions, and that can't be like the the fuel that allows you to just be a little bit more animated. It shows, can you practice the way you show up on the stage, right?
Totally.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I think it's we're basketball fans in our house, and I grew up outside of Toronto as a kid, and I was a Lakers fan, and so I was Showtime, showing my age, right? Like Worthy and Magic and all those guys,
Mhm.
and then that extended obviously to the Shaq and the Kobe years, and we have three teenagers we're raising, and as we sort of they're youngish teenagers, but as they were bringing them into the basketball fold and teaching them about sort of the Mamba mentality. And
Mhm.
my middle child is kind of like completely all Mamba, all Kobe right now about that attitude. And I guess where I'm going with this is, if you're a speaker, you kind of have to have a bit of a Mamba mentality. So
Mhm.
that means you've got to really put in the hours and hone in on those words, that story, that photo, and practice. You
Yeah.
can't just get up and wing it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's where I think you've got opportunity now within the confines of a pandemic to still practice within your room, your office, what have you, at home,
Yeah.
in your condo, and then when you're kind of ready to be unleashed again to physical face-to-face audiences, are you ever going to be knocking it out of the park? So a little bit of Mamba, I think, is in need for speakers as well.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, like, we talk about the Mamba mentality, right? I think as speakers, you have to have like that mental fortitude, right? Do you feel like your wife has the same mentality, or are you guys just on two different ends of the spectrum?
My mom is, or my wife is Mamba Mamba, I would say. Like, she's a French gal here in Canada that runs the show. And so, she's a director of academics for a school of about 1,200 students. And with her fortitude and her resilience through a pandemic, I've never seen her lead more clearly than ever. And for me, it just, the gods somehow paired us up, and it's been a wonderful union for 25 years now, Charles. How
Yeah,
about that?
that's
25
awesome.
years together. Yeah.
Yeah, we just went on a year in February.
Congrats.
So, young in the game, but love is love, right? Uh
Oh, good on you.
I'm curious to know, like, what's your routine like? What is a life in a day, however they say it, of you rehearsing your speech? Because I feel like a lot of times people don't know what that truly looks like. Whether that's you in the living room or you going to the beach to rehearse. What does that look like for you?
Oh, great question. And there's a few things. First of all, I'm always constantly curating for stories.
Hmm.
And, I might have 10 stories I find in a day. I might have two, and, 0.01 of the stories that I find make it into talks.
Mhm.
So I'm always trying to figure out, stories that are from different backgrounds, different citizenry, different ethnicity, different countries, different verticals, you name it, right? So I use Evernote, which is a pretty cool app. And so
Mhm.
I have a bunch of file folders, if you will, in Evernote that has, story for CPG, story for Black Lives Matter, story for Canadian Indigenous rights, and so on. And again, I think it's important for speakers to not only have their methodology, their process, their content, but you've got to have stories. So
Yeah.
that's number one. I curate all the time. Number two, when I ever take on a keynote or a discussion of some sort, it's tailored. I'm kind of a weird one, Charles. I don't believe in canned keynotes.
No,
I
no,
don't
no
believe in
cookie cutter,
delivering
huh?
the same keynote. Like, first of all, it would drive me crazy. I'd be bored to tears. Like, why would I go and deliver the same thing over and over again?
Yeah.
I must have probably 1,000 stories, as I say, the ones that I've used.
Mhm.
And again, I mean, at the end of this episode today that we're recording, I'm going into a 10 o'clock keynote. And that is for a government entity up here in Canada, in Alberta, province of Alberta.
Mhm.
It's a 45-minute talk. It's 25 minutes basically of me having thought about and worked with those leaders on what they've gone through here in the pandemic, and bringing their stories, because I've talked with several leaders over there, bringing their stories into the talk.
Mm.
and then weaving that into a couple of the books that I've written and some of the content from there, and then saying, here, this is the package.
Yeah.
And so what I've done is part three to your kind of question would be, I've gone for a bike ride yesterday, and I've noodled that talk and the process and the stories in my head, and I play it back to myself, even though I'm not looking at slides.
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't really use text and slides; they're just pictures, and I tell the stories, right? But
Right.
I'm thinking about the flow, and I'm playing back what those stories are going to be, how I might intonate a certain word, where I might
Mhm.
pause for added effect, things
Right.
like that, right? The old Barack Obama bit, and that's essentially how I prepare. So total curation, total tailored, and then I have a couple runs in my head of what I think the flow will be like. Obviously, I've planned out the slides in advance
Yeah.
somewhere in there as well.
That's a unique process. I like that. I might pick up on some of those points as well. So
Awesome.
what do you feel like we should be doing right now to prepare for when things open up, or is there anything that we should be doing differently to prepare for when things are opening up and event planners are now booking in-person speakers?
I would be, and I am, taking stories from the pandemic and I guess cataloging them or putting them in some sort of file folder or library like Evernote, and waiting for the opportunity in which to use those. Don't wait for getting hired
Yeah.
and then say, oh, how am I going to use a story here? Again, back to my point of curating. Like we've been at a year at it, as we've talked about, right? Happy anniversary again of the pandemic. And so, what stories do you have over the past year that you can then weave into whatever your thread or content base is? It doesn't matter what. The thing with the pandemic is that it's never going to go away. Yes, the pandemic will go away, but the pandemic won't go away, i.e., there's opportunity for you to take the stories and the content, the
The
good
history.
and the bad of the pandemic, and to put it into your talks and speeches for the future, because everyone can then look back and during the time when it's a post-pandemic world and say, wow, Charles, that was an amazing story you told about those kids in Tampa and what they did to raise money for the elderly in the long-term care home. Like whatever, I'm
Yeah.
making it up, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what you should be doing right now.
Yeah. I think speaking is like art, right? And artists, they're always displaying what's going on right now, right? Like that's true art, and that's something that's timeless, right? I encourage you guys to share those now stories. Like we don't always have to rely on the what we've been through story, but what's going on now, because that's what the relatability comes in and the connection. And yeah, just like you said, to be able to talk about COVID-19, to be able to talk about like 9/11 and all those things, and say that we made it through, that is a
Hmm.
thing that's going to build that connection and allow people to see that we're not alone in this. So yeah, much respect to that. So what would you say, what have you ever made a wrong turn in your speaking career, and what allowed you to get back to the center?
Well, wrong turns happen all the time because sometimes you're coming out and you're flat, so it could be a wrong turn, in the talk itself, and you misjudge the audience, let's say,
Yeah.
and those are difficult. I mean, they're humbling because you've prepared. Obviously, you've had the conversations with the team, whoever it is on the other side, and then just all of a sudden you're like, that story didn't work, that joke didn't work, that talk, and it's just like, whoa, what went wrong? So I think again, back to art, whether you're a musician and you put out a bad song or a bad album and you're like, how come that didn't hit? I thought that was awesome. You just go back and you're like, okay, what do I learn from this? And how do I get better at the fact that I just bombed? So that would be kind of one overarching piece of advice.
Yeah.
And for me, like wrong turns sometimes are gigs that you take, and I've learned now how to say no. At first, I would say yes to everything,
Mm.
and what I've learned is to say no, because not every speaking engagement is the same. So you want to be careful about who you're associated with. You want to be careful about what that audience is, and what might happen. In a recording of it that goes YouTube or wherever, social media. So again, like pick your friends, I suppose, right? So pick your clients as well.
Yeah.
So it's okay to say no. Don't just because of the draw of the dollar say yes to everything. That would be number two. And then, for me personally, um, the wrong turns or the struggles is the fact that, I've written 4 books, and now it's kind of like, well, how do I use portions of the books, and what am I trying to really get at? So I've got to be very crystal clear on the focus of the talk now. I
Mm-hmm.
used to just talk about culture and engagement in organizations. Then I added purpose. And so I'm like, okay, I got culture, I got purpose. Then I added a whole book about thinking, how to be a better, open, creative thinker. And then I wrote a book about caring leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm writing a book about courage that hasn't even out yet. So I have a difficulty in my head of being very crystal clear on what it is I'm trying to get across, and not being, too generic and too unhelpful
Yeah.
to too many people.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. What would you tell somebody who's looking to get started in speaking, but they have some fears, or maybe they're just a little bit uncertain about some things? What would you tell them?
Hey, get on the horse, because you never know where that horse is going to take you, first and foremost, right? And the other bit is that there are horrible speakers out there, and they're getting paid. So as long as even if you're horrible, you probably get a gig.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So true.
I mean, let's call a spade here.
Yeah.
And I think we haven't even delved into things like speaking agencies, etc. I don't. Here's the thing: I wouldn't go out, without you building up and harness or harvesting your craft and really like honing in on it. Don't go out to Washington Speaker Bureau or wherever, NSB, and just start saying, "Hey, look, here I am. I'm awesome." Be humble and build at it. Give away your talks. Do a bunch of free conferences, right? Like, just practice by doing it for free, which is what basically I did for 7 or 8 years, and
Mhm.
then I launched into fee paying. So I think that's one of the weird factors of the industry, is that there's far too many people who believe, oh, I'm going to be a speaker right away, and that they're going to be in an agency and be, ripping up 25 grand talks every 6 weeks. Okay, that's not how it works, right? It's
Yeah.
like musicianship, as you mentioned. I love the fact, Charles, you call it art. It is art. But unless, if you look at, like, whether it's Chuck D or Billie Eilish, they all started young and practice and practice and practice.
Yeah.
And then, in their early teens or late teens or early 20s, all of a sudden you're like, Chuck, that is amazing word. Like PE, love it, right? But
Yeah.
he didn't start out, as a 12-year-old, all of a sudden launched into, being one of the best rap groups ever, or hip
Yeah.
hop. Like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So again, take your time.
yeah, I say the more you speak, the more you get paid, and whether that's free or whether you're getting paid for it, the more you do it, it's going to happen for you.
I
And
love that. The more
yeah,
you speak, the more you get paid.
the more you get paid, and I think it's also the idea, like, we understand that there's no overnight success because
Yeah.
it requires so much, and there's little steps in that process that we got to take. So whatever part of the journey that you're on right now, decide to take that first step. It might be the advice that Dan gave you today. It might be that idea that you've been sleeping on for so long and you just need to do something with it. It might be you need to get a coach, or it might be get involved into a community, or something. The thing is, take the step. It only takes a step for you to get closer to that destination. Whatever that is, go do it, tribe. Dan, before we go, where can the tribe find you?
Hey, it's probably easiest with my last book, because my name is so hard to remember. The last book is called Lead Care Win. So just go to leadcarewin.com, and you'll be taken to all my goodness there, if you will.